Okay, I'll call this Finance Committee meeting to order on October 8th at 6 p.m. Mr. Dunphy, the chairman, could not attend, so I will sit in as chairman for this particular meeting. Our agenda is to discuss the budget for 2025. I would like to take a moment, if we could, and just think about the people in the path of this hurricane that's coming. And so if we could just have a moment of silence for that. Thank you. So to start, Mr. Sampington, the auditor, is here. We're going to be discussing again the budget for 2025. This is our first meeting about that. So we have a preliminary budget that we're going to go over. I'm not sure that we'll have it set in one meeting. No,
I don't think so.
So with that, we'll get started, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Sampington.
All righty, thank you to the Finance Committee, Mr. President, audience in attendance, and folks or media who may be watching at home. Excuse me. I'm going to start with actually two agenda items. One is from the acting city manager, Mr. Tolliver, or Chief Tolliver. The reserve policy that folks should have on their desk, the proposed reserve policy. And then we'll get to the budget, if you don't mind. The Chief Tolliver has expressed, I think to council directly, I'm pretty sure, the concern that the part-time administrative assistant is still not filled. That leaves it a struggle to both answer residents who come in to the city manager's office, as well as answer phone calls. And of course, Mr. Tolliver's office is actually in the police department. So that's not even, he's not placed in there while he's acting manager. So he was not able to make it tonight. He asked me to discuss a plan he's formulated that is building on something that I think was discussed a little bit before he took over. And that would be to work with Career Connections in the Plains, who can help fill positions from a broad range of applications and resumes across the county. What they do is give the city a series of folks, recommended folks that the city can decide to interview, and we probably would, and then fill that position. Career Connections would pay them directly, and then they would invoice the city. So they would be an indirect employee for the city. I believe he sent an email to the law director clearing that that's okay. It is something we've done before in that position. If you think back to the HAPCAP interns, they used to fill that position and actually were quite talented, very good. These were folks who really wanted to get into the workforce and get into the professional environment like an office. There are some things the committee would need to act on to do that. So one would be just authorizing the hiring of an indirect employee like that. Currently, the staffing ordinance says we hire our own. I did pose the question, if it's helpful to the committee, you might know this about me. I ask questions, probably 3 more than I need to, but I like to get the full answer. So I did ask him what he felt was the benefit via just hiring ourselves. And it was two primary points. I don't want to put a ton of words in his mouth, but the way I took it was capacity. He's currently running both the city and his department. Just sheer capacity of bringing on a new person, training them, walking them through the process and all these things. He was hopeful to get some help from this agency who can help not just place the person, but train them and help narrow it down to a field of folks. And the other was just to leave it flexible for the, how do I put this delicately, the future. So in case that whomever and whenever there is a permanent city manager, whoever that may be, can make a final call themselves on that office and that position, if that makes sense. Of course, Career Connections actually encourages folks to hire from them. So if that person is great and everybody thinks they're doing a great job, and in a year from now, whoever's the city manager thinks they're doing a great job, they can actually just hire them directly from Career Connections and pull them onto the payroll. So the two main points was just capacity and flexibility. He doesn't want to lock future folks into a arrangement that they might want to change or adjust.
I think those are two excellent reasons to consider it.
I thought so too. I wasn't sure when I asked the question.
Well, look at the flexibility it gives us.
Yeah.
Not only them being flexible, us being flexible.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Now, who's going to make a decision on this individual?
I think Mr. Tolliver's plan was to take a recommendation of 2 to 3 from Career Connections, interview them, and then pick from those.
Okay.
So you need a recommendation from the committee to bring legislation forward to do this?
And then in that legislation, so Career Connections said the going rate for administrative professionals is about 17. They did kind of express that that was probably also a minimum. They have a lot of folks, they said, who said 18, 19, 20. The current staffing ordinance says starts at 15.
15.
So essentially, council's gonna have to authorize a rate or a cost that essentially higher than that, essentially.
And this would be a full-time position.
I didn't ask that question. I think he still envisioned it at 30 or 32 hours, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I don't remember him saying it switched to full-time, but I could be mistaken.
Why it seems like getting someone in the administrative position has been money all along. Why don't we just take it up to 18 as opposed to 17?
They did tell him that 17 was probably a 4. They said if you really want the competitive folks, you might have to come up some. Which, according to, if you look at our contracts for administrative folks, they are all higher than that. So that's pretty much the going rate.
And this individual is going to be very busy.
Yeah.
Very busy.
Nancy, no.
We can actually set a cap at how much, and if we can get somebody in for less, we can also do that, correct? Because we could write a contract that would be
That's
what
right.
they would be coming in to get paid for. So if we were set, let's say, set at 18, 19 bucks an hour,
Yeah.
that's the maximum
Yeah.
right there. We could set a lower base rate coming in, saying, okay, this is start out, if you work out, you have the potential to make up to this, correct?
I think so. So the way that I understood it was the applicants are required to put a range on the application. And I'm told, or Devin was told that, I should have used this title, sorry, that Chief Tolliver was told that they often turn it down if it's not in their range, the applicants.
Right.
So say their range was 18 to 20 and the city said we can pay you 17, that person will likely say no. Because they've set a rate. These are folks trying to get into a new field, trying to get a job, maybe have had a bump or two, and maybe don't even have 20 years of experience, but they have 2 or 3, and they're trying to get that start. But when they pick that range, I mean, it's based off their family circumstances.
Well, we can set the high end cap.
Yeah.
And if somebody puts in, let's say, 18 to, or we set it at, let's say, $20 an hour.
Mhm.
If somebody puts it in anywhere from 17 to $19 an hour,
Mhm.
and we can offer them $18 an hour, even though the maximum is gonna be 20, with the potential to come up to that, which would give them a little bit better incentive, I believe, wouldn't it?
I would think so, and I believe you can do that. Yeah, I believe you can start if they're starting, and then say they're doing great, and 6 months or a year, we can say it's going to change.
Okay, so the committee is on board recommending moving forward at 18 an hour, part-time.
At least.
At least.
Would that range? It would give Devin some flex. Chief Tolliver, some flexibility if you guys said something like 18 to 20,
Yeah,
Okay.
if that's acceptable.
that's what I would say. We give a maximum of how high with no less than what we got. I think we're 15 now.
Yeah.
So no less than 15 and no higher than 20. Or,
But aren't they going to, okay, when they're interviewed, what are they going to be told is the salary or the hourly rate?
I suppose that would be, that'd probably be a good question for Chief Tolliver. I think so these are folks, they fill out a generic application at Career Connections. And I think the rate that they'll accept is on it. So they don't even know the city's looking yet.
Oh,
So I think the city will know what they're looking for before we interview them, if that makes sense.
yes,
So that, at that point, the chief can say, let's say their minimum was 1850, council authorized 18 to 20. Chief Tolliver could say, I can give you 1850. I think. I know, I'm sorry, he couldn't make it and he apologizes, but that's my understanding. Of it. But he did wanna, it was important to him, because he wants to make sure that citizens are served in that office when they have those requests, for sure.
well, I don't think it's just important to him, it's important to the community because we need somebody in the office.
Yep.
Over there and to pick up some of the administrative slack that's not going on right now.
And along with that would be a job description. So the committee's fine with that?
yes.
I'm fine with it.
I am too. Okay.
All right, thank you. The next one, so at the government finance officers of Ohio, well, of America, the Ohio chapter, conference that I attended, what feels like a year ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I was part of a series of trainings on all kinds of topics, but one of the ones I specifically chose ahead of time was on reserves, because the city's in a position where it has some. In the budget, you'll hear me express some concerns about how some of those reserves could be under stress over the next 2 to 5 year window. I found out that a lot of cities and villages have a written reserve policy, or a lot of the ones that care about financial stability, let's put it that way. Actually, most don't have a written policy, but the ones that care about the future of the finances do. We do not have one. I reinforce the concept of a reserve policy in my auditor's report every month, where I talk for the last 5 years about a healthy fund balance in our 5 primary funds. I lose my train of thought. I took a template from the Government Finance Officers of America, added in information relevant to Nelsonville, explanations that are relevant to Nelsonville, and put forward this proposed reserve policy on your desk here. When I say reserves, I mean carryover funds. Layman term might be rainy day. But some places like Ohio actually physically place, like the state of Ohio, place rainy day in a separate fund and then vote to use it or not to use it. That's actually, according to my training, that's actually not the best policy, because what ends up happening, no offense to any council folks in the room, is that legislators across the country with policies like that find it all too easy by majority vote to just, we're going to take 100,000 from the rainy day. We're going to take 200,000 for it. We need sidewalks. Here's 50,000. We need, our street paving is short 100. We're going to take, and what ends up happening is it just gets spent like everything else, in too many cases. So what they discussed was, with a written policy that reflects what I've discussed for the last 5 years, which is a healthy fund balance, they said that what works best in the long term is a policy with a culture that reinforces it. And I'm thankful to both this council and previous council members since 2019, when I took over, that there has been a very strong acceptance of the culture that we have to have stability to be able to provide services in the future, stability in our finances. So this is a quick attempt, not a quick attempt. I say quick because it's one page. This is as simple, straightforward as an attempt to put in a policy that the council, the auditor, and the city has a goal of keeping reserves between 40, at least 40% of expenses. The goal, excuse me, I've given the council in the past is 50. And then a concept that I hope Nelsonville gets used to all the time is bullet point number 2, which is maximum reserves. So in other words, once a reserve reaches 60% of a year's worth of expenses, the council and the auditor, city manager, so on and so forth, will set forward plans to invest those funds into services or projects, so that we're not over saving, which would, in finance speak, would be being so conservative that you're not actually getting your money's worth. And that's my pitch. I'd love to see council as a whole. So some finance offices just adopt this policy from the elected auditor. However, it doesn't have legal punch. If the auditor says the goal is to keep 35% reserves, the council can budget whatever they want as the legislative body. So best practice says build consensus, build on the culture, and put it in writing, which is my goal today, in the coming months as well. So it may or may not be related to, there's a chance, as you might know, that I may not be here in a year. And I would like to impart as much policy and culture and trajectory for not just the council, but who, there's a chance that somebody else may also be at the helm as well.
So these funds would go into a separate line item?
They would stay within the fund. So for example, in this policy, bullet point 1 says at a minimum, the reserves for general water sewer funds are 3 major funds. Will be equal to at least 40% of expenses. So that, in other words, that the budget would ensure each year that we don't spend anything out of the carryover that brings the general fund under 40% of a year's worth of expenses. So in numerical terms, for next year, if this proposed budget ends up close to where we end up, that would be about $1,050,000 in the general funds, for example. So it basically just sets a percentage on each fund and says we would like to keep at least this.
So that money would sit there over time. Is there any way to be able to put that money in a position to draw interest or anything like that?
So it would. So currently all of our accounts are interest bearing. So every dollar saved does actually earn the taxpayer more money every day. How do I say this? We currently, the treasurer and I shoot for 50%. We've been shooting for 5 years for 50% of expenses in each fund to be reserves. We've accomplished that on all of those things. It will be easier for this treasurer and future treasurers to invest them in things like certificate of deposits instead of money markets if they know that the written policy is we want to at least keep this to the side. So he actually, even though we increased the certificates of deposit from 3 million to 3.5 this year, we actually probably could have went further, but for that little voice in the back of the head that says, what if the 2025 budget, what if council says, we're spending, meaning we're spending it all. And as a legislative body, the council could say that. There's nothing besides maybe disaster stopping you from, from doing that, but nothing legally from stopping the council from doing that. And having the confidence of a council-backed policy, it could be invested into certificates of deposit or bond notes that do get higher rates.
So basically what you're saying is each line item that we have, you break that down to where we only take it down 60%. And I'm like, try to take it only down 60% and leave that 40% at the end of the year to be able to carry it over to the next year. Correct? That's the way I'm understanding it?
It's close, it's close. So what we would do, I don't have one in front of me, so I give you guys a cash statement on my auditor's report. It's got all those columns, month to date and year to date. What we would do is at the end of the year prior, which for us would be December 31st, 2023. The column that says year-to-date expenses, we would take the percentage off of that. And we would say, we want at least this in reserve for the next year. So that we know that if there's a major, I mean, like, you know what I mean? I would knock on wood and God forbid, but if there's a flood, if there's an economic, if there's a stock market meltdown, maybe a major employer slashes its jobs by half in town. There is sufficient stability to survive those things. And basically the treasurer and I for the last 5 years have stated this all verbally. We know this is our strategy, this percentage-based approach, this reserve policy. But it was interesting to learn the positive impacts on cities and villages that put it in writing and ask the council to buy into it as
So
well.
you're saying basically whatever we got left over at the end of the year, you tally that up, what we have to a positive, you take 40% of that and put it back.
That's not,
No,
So essentially, so if the general fund has 2 million in expenses
Right.
for all of 23, we would say for the next year, we want at least 40% of that. So, whatever that would be, 890,000 or something like that. So we don't take any of the line items, we just say, this is how much we spent in the general fund.
Right.
In the whole thing. And we have 40% of that number, and the budget needs to at least make sure that we don't spend a carryover below that number. Okay. It basically creates a safety net on the reserves. Our current reserves are 6.7 or 8 million. So my first day it was 1.8. So they've grown. And that's good. But if you look at places very nearby, like school districts and not even cities or villages, they have more because they have major projects that they're going to put 4 million towards. And we're not in that position yet, but I'm hopeful someday we get to that position where the city can effectively multiply its money and maintain services. Multiply it in the sense that you put in 1 million, the state puts in 5. Because when you only have 50,000 to give them, they don't give you nothing.
sorry.
Oh, you're good, you're good. And I'm off track, but the main point being that it both creates financial stability for economic downturns and multiplies the ability of the council to invest in the community.
so it comes, the percentage comes from the expenses from the prior year.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And that way it grows. So in other words, if we did 50% today, 20 years or 40% today, 40 years from now, 40%, that number would be way too small. But if it grew with expenses, it would grow with inflation over time. I think I'm making sense, right? I got off track a couple times, but you should have just been there in training with me. I'm just kidding.
Well, that's why this is our first meeting.
Right, right. No, it was good. I heard from some folks like, I believe New Albany discussed theirs, Upper Arlington. These are cities much larger and wealthier than ours, but they have professional, I'm talking, degree after degree after degree, CPAs, 20-year accountants. They have these folks in these offices because they can afford it, of course, who have set up these processes by which the taxpayer of those cities never have to worry ever about fiscal emergency. And frankly, just because Nelsonville's not rich New Albany, I don't think we deserve any less, and our taxpayers either. And so I'd like to replicate, at least in part, that stability in those efforts.
Well, it's a step in the right direction.
Any other? Yeah,
I was just saying, as a citizen, it would make me feel a lot better. Because when you see somebody spending all the money and you go, well, we all know we fall short sometimes because of certain things going on. And as a city, as a whole, for your citizens, it's important to know that you care enough to keep our concerns in mind. Not what you think you want to spend because it looks good for whatever reason. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you.
the nice thing too is that it gives council a written policy when instructing folks like the city manager. So say if expenses got out of line in the future, excuse me, the council could say, we've clearly stated our written goal for finances and financial stability. And this is out of line with that. So we'd like to see your plan to get back to that. It's harder when it's just verbal, when it's just the auditor telling you guys, this is our goal. It's harder to say that our plan was violated. Of course, plans can be changed, and they should be in the future. It's actually why I left it at 1 page. I thought if I came at you with 20 pages, that was unnecessary and did a lot of work that may be irrelevant 10 years from now. And council can change it to meet their needs then. One thing I didn't mention was it does explain what it thinks the acceptable uses of reserves are. You'll notice it uses language that doesn't lock that in, but it sets a goal for the council. It's to strive to use if there's too many reserves, it instructs the council, here's some of our goals for what you should use that money on. And it's essentially explains it's to provide short-term budgetary relief for the city to be able to restructure its operations and budgets in a timely manner. The authority to use reserves is set to the city council, and by definition, the auditor's office who has to spend that money. And then the replenishment of reserves, it shows that say there is a major economic downturn, we have to eat into our reserves, and instead of at 40% of the expenses, we fall into 25. The statewide minimum for the general fund is 10 or 12. So which minimum is, it is not minimum like we might use minimum in our daily lives. Minimum is, if you're anywhere near that, you are on the state auditor's radar for fiscal emergency. So when I say minimum, I mean rock bottom. Titanic's hit the ocean floor, rock bottom. But say the city falls to 25, it instructs then the city auditor to propose a plan to the council to put the city back on track for these goals in the next 1 to 3 years. Then of course, council would have to either accept or adjust that. So it creates a pathway for when our finances do change, which they naturally will at some point. They're changing right now. It creates a pathway for how to keep the ship afloat. Okay. Thoughts or questions?
No, I think at this point,
Okay. All righty. I do owe that to Mr. Robe. I told him on the phone last week actually, but he has not seen it yet, so I'll have him review it as well. And if the committee's agreeable, propose it to the full council or.
yes.
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 Okay. All right. Give me just a sec. Now the stuff you actually came here for. The budget. So bear with me in this budget. This is a very rough first draft. It's an expense model. It's not perfect. There are some numbers you'll notice. I noticed in this, the very last page, it still proposes expenses in the rescue plan, American Rescue Plan, ARPA. That's not correct. That's because we had expenses this year and my model picked that up and expects it for next year. I actually only noticed that right before the meeting. So there are a few things that need changed, but generally the picture is there. So there's 2 documents. The first has a little bit of bold at the top that says revenue expectations. You can see across our funds on those 4 or 5 pages, the first column is the line items. But the middle column is what has been brought in those line items as of, let's see, I've been working on this for a month, so August 31st, because you have to use the last reconciled month. And then it projects out, this revenue model projects out what may be brought in at the end of the year and into 2025.
So that $830,000 includes a little bit left over from 24 too.
It does not. That's over on the expense one, right?
Yes.
So that it does not. Those are just 2025.
Okay,
But what the model does is basically build logically the rest of the year
thank you.
and then builds onto what they think next year will be. So what you see is just 25. So revenues. So in all of our funds, revenues grew in 24. You may notice some changes, some line items might have gone up, some gone down, but on the whole, you will notice, well, I guess you'd have to do the math, but they're on track to increase on December 31st of this year. And then these are the projections for next year. But I can tell you that across all funds, revenues did increase. Some revenue line items were a little weaker than others. Some I expect to be weaker, even though they were stronger this year. For example, interest income from our accounts. We're actually on track. If you look at on the first page, I don't know what that is, maybe 20 lines down, it says investment income earned. Instead of 175 by August, it was on track for almost 300,000. Just short of it. However, you'll notice I put 225,000 for next year. That's actually a manual change I made over top the model because the Fed's cutting rates. So CDs, certificates of deposit and interest-bearing accounts are already down from where they were 2 months ago. We may get somewhat fortunate. Our certificate of deposit expires and it is at, I believe, 4. And rates haven't quite crossed that 4% threshold. So we might actually luck out for a year on the certificate of deposit, but the other interest-bearing accounts, current expectations, the Fed will drop rates by about a third over the next 12 months.
So investment income earned for this year to this point,
175.
175,
That's through August 31st.
right?
On track for, I guess if you did the math, maybe around 280, 275. Mm-hmm. Very good year for
I was
interest.
gonna say, that seems very good.
Very good. Well, I think my first auditor's report, or first treasurer's report I ever presented to you guys for the whole year, because that was December of 2019. That was for the whole year, and I think it had brought in $1,100.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the rates have changed significantly. Of course, the city also has more money that is bearing interest. But I do think that we will come down in 25. We're already coming down, let's put it that way.
Right.
So I do that. You'll notice a few other things like miscellaneous receipts in the general fund is lower than this previous number at August 31st. Part of that is because we received, without being too personal about confidential information, we received a one-time payment on a bond that was very large of 130 and a few other one-time receipts that I don't think we can replicate. But on the whole, the general fund's revenues do increase. Let me check this number really quick. Okay. So moving on, gas tax funds, that's where primarily gas tax and street levy are where our street operations come from. Those are pretty stable revenue sources, assuming the voters renew it this year, this November. So we don't see major changes. Those are about on track. Pools are about on track. I did use a conservative amount on the pool. You may notice pool admissions and concessions are just under what had been brought into the season. I do that because our pool revenues are the most, what's the word I want to use? Wily revenue source we have. One year they'll be up 15%, next year they'll be down 20%. So it's not a good bet to bet that they will always increase because they don't. So I wanted to answer that question for sure.
Since we're on the pool, I'd like to ask,
Yeah.
when could we receive a, pool performance report for 24
It will be in my auditor's report. It'll be included with it this month.
for October? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Trying to think what day that is. Is that like the
The 28th,
26th or 28th?
the second meeting.
I don't want to belabor the point on revenue too much longer. The water funds and sewer funds increase. You'll see a couple notes. You'll see a note out to the side of what 4% increase would look like. That's the proposed rate in the city's financial plans for our projects that you guys have seen before when you had to raise sewer rates. I think under the, pretty sure you two have. When did you join?
What,
When did you join council?
March of this year?
Oh, so you might not have seen one yet. So you'll see it this year. There's financial projections the city had to do to get all these OWDA, USDA funds. The council can ignore those 4% rate increases. I will say our funding agencies don't love it. So if we do ignore those, we should probably make up for it in expenses, but that's a different discussion. I have a note here, water project reimbursement has been running through the water fund because those are state and federal funds. Best practices, those should be in their own fund, not mixed in with the water fund. So I propose, and just in this note, I'm gonna ask the council to create a water project fund, like there's a sewer project fund, and to move over there. Let's see. And yeah, I mean, that's the revenue side. One of the revenues that was a little weaker than expected was trash funds. I haven't quite pinpointed why, if my expectation was too rosy, or if maybe because the trash part of the bill is paid last when there's delinquencies. It pays water first, sewer second, trash last. I'm not quite sure what the disconnect, maybe it's a combination of both things. But our trash revenues are just short of expectations. They're about 5% short.
So that's, monthly refuge rents and penalties?
That's right.
That's what you're referring to?
Yep. I know this is a lot of information, but I figured
This is a starting point.
this is a starting. And so the reason I start with revenue, some of you guys may know, if you've been through this process before, is because I build the revenue first so that we know what we can spend. I mean, that's to be honest, not all folks start. Most folks start their budget, they just increase whatever last year's was, 4%, that's your budget. I prefer to see the revenue first so that we can say where our weaknesses and strengths are, can we afford it, et cetera. And then I move on to expenses, which is the thicker packet. Any questions? Sorry, I should slow down. Any questions?
Since I'm just looking at this.
Right, I know.
Probably not at the moment.
I want to offer, because I'm throwing a lot of information out there.
Yeah, that's fine. Again, this is our starting point.
That's right. So I'm gonna go backwards on the expenses, and there's a good reason, I promise. I'm not just crazy, though. Some days I feel that way. In the sewer fund, there are notable increases in equipment and investment in some things. That's through conversations with both Mr. Cohen and the sewer plant operator. The sewer plant, of course, itself is brand spanking new.
Where do we find that in here?
Oh, it's the 750 fund, so that,
I mean,
Because-
like, what
What
page? The pages aren't numbered.
I know, I should have done that. For me, it's starts the second from the last.
Oh,
page.
that's easy.
It's you'll notice the numbers, the first set of numbers will start saying 750.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So in the 750 fund, the sewer plant itself, of course, is brand new. It's opening up opportunities for the sewer plant operator to start getting things replaced at lift stations. For example, generators that are the bane of their existence and constantly breaking, and pumps that are older than they should be, and so on and so forth, which is all good. With the new plant this year, actually, I'm not sure if he described it the same way. He might have a different way. The way I've seen it is that that plant has opened up. So it used to be that they were spending full time just keeping the old plant alive, keep it from dying. I mean, it was like multiple full-time jobs, just keep the old plant from spilling out into the Hocking. And of course, we have a new one. So with that new time and freed up resources, especially capacity, I just noticed the sewer folks having a project list that's growing very quickly. And it's run into budget constraints because we didn't budget for a rapid increase in those generators and pumps being replaced. And because I didn't expect that. That was an unintended consequence of the new plant. It was a learning opportunity for both me, but I mean for the city as a whole too.
Why in the world would they be asking for replacements already?
Not at the new plant, at the lift stations,
Oh, the list.
the other parts of the sewer system.
Okay.
Yeah, so essentially, the beating heart of it has no longer needs, shocked alive. The actual plant is surviving just fine and is great. So he's finding time to look deeper into the field and find the plans to fix these problems that are pulling them in every weekend and stuff like that. So this was my long way of explaining. I made sure to include some increases in equipment upgrades so that we could fix some of those lift stations, and their generators and their pumps. What do all those things do at a lift station? I have no idea, but I can use those terms loosely because I pay for them all the time. Other than that, the sewer fund's pretty standard. Compared to 5 years ago, our sewer debt payment is much larger than it used to be. But we got a new sewer plant out of it. And that is honestly, over the last 5 years, the main change in that fund is that last line item, 750, 770. Excuse me. Yes, actually, there's a typo right here at that line item. It's too bad I brought your attention to it. It should say, the 400,000 should be one line down in sewer debt repayment. That number is primarily for the sewer plant.
So 400,000 is the payment.
It's just short of that. It's
Yeah.
a rounding up,
Okay.
yes, but, and that is before, what phase are we on? It's certainly before phase 4, but I don't even think phase 3 is completely done. Because I think DB Weber's still in town, so, that number may creep up. All right.
So I have a couple of questions since
Yes.
we're in the sewer part. So our collection system has kind of been identified as on the weak side.
Mhm.
Do we have any current plans for grants or anything like that to upgrade the collection system?
That's a good question. I don't know of any in the pipeline for collection upgrades. There's certainly sewer phase 4 is coming up. Phase 3, if you remember, DB Weber tore up a bunch of streets in town and then had to repave over them.
Right.
They were replacing, that might be water that I'm specifically talking about. They replaced a lot of water lines in town.
They did.
But we also fixed several lift stations, not their pumps and generators, the actual lift station mechanisms. A couple were replaced, including this one right here at City Hall,
Yeah.
if you remember, or the VFW. But those phase 4 is just an expansion of sewer down the road to Scenic Lane. So in general, I would say there's not in the pipeline for a major sewer system upgrade or overhaul.
So this, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, as far as scenic lane goes, since the garbage has taken over the hillside, how far is it gonna get?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. I've asked that question a couple times. I haven't gotten a strong answer for sure.
Who are we waiting for for that answer?
I think it would be smart for the council to very seriously, ask, and by the way, this is not a criticism of him, I just mean, the council should very thoughtfully talk with
Mr. Benz?
Mr. Betts about what is a good strategic vision here, for the next 20, 30 years.
Understand that there are a couple houses in that have already been purchased that are going to be demolished soon because the water is leaking down the hill into those houses. So a couple of those are gonna be demolished and the people have moved out of them.
Wow.
That may not answer.
There's houses on a hill and then there's below them, there's houses?
No, the water is coming from the hill down to those houses and they have to redirect it, that's what I understand. But the people have moved out because they knew that was gonna happen. Some of the houses are able to be rented for, 6 or 10 years? And some aren't.
That's what I've heard as well. Although to be fair, mine's all rumor mill, so you may be more informed than
Well,
me. Mine's all barbershop talk.
Well,
That's
the
all
only
I've
one
heard.
I know about is Cojeras.
Okay,
Because they have moved out of there and it was said because they're gonna have to take it down now because there's a water drainage problem.
Is there an issue with the Schaefer's house?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
I will say, I talked, my last meeting with Mr. Betts was over a separate issue, but I did bring it up. I said, is there any reason, the city should be concerned about entering into 20-year or 30-year loans on a sewer expansion that may not be used for 30 years. I mean, I don't know that it won't be used for 30, I can't predict the future. Maybe they'll be rented maybe people will go through those houses forever, but it doesn't look that way.
No, it's done after 10 years or 6, it's either 6 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Those will not be living houses.
So it's a question. It's a question I think the council could pretty
Yeah,
thoughtfully engage.
I think we need to turn that over to the utility committee.
I like that.
So,
Sorry.
along with that, we truly need a capital improvement plan. So that short-term, long-term, we are looking at different projects such as the collection system upgrade, just as a part of that capital improvement plan. So, with that, at the sewer treatment plant, the utilities, the electric use obviously has come in way higher than what it was projected.
Way higher.
Way higher. Yeah. The budget for 25, where is the projections for the utilities? Is that in there?
It is. So let me make sure I speak my columns right. Okay. So yes, so utilities for the sewer plant, it's 750, 760. And then you'll see a little line that says utilities. So the old plant, we were budgeting under 80,000. In fact, several years ago, under 70 and 60,000, if you go back far enough. Well, not that far, but a few years back. Those numbers have increased. The middle column is the projected at year end, just under 152,000, which is a big increase. And then I increased that to make sure when it comes to utilities, you want to come in over, because who on council wants me to come and ask for a review for every utility bill, right? That's the most standard payment there is. So I bring it to 175. I round it off nicely and say this should be enough to cover if it's extra cold, extra hot, extra waste at the plant, so on and so forth. But that is a much larger number, more than double what it used to be.
There was some talk about putting some solar panels up on that hillside, so that's still. Would it offset some of that potential?
Solar certainly could. I don't know if there's still talk now. I know the city has lots of options. We have lots of land in town, and because we have lots of land, and I say lots, we're not the biggest landowner by any means, but we have plenty of parcels. For example, out by the water plant, where solar could be placed to offset. It doesn't have to be next to a certain facility to still offset utility costs, because they all come in the same envelope for us. This is just my long way of saying, I don't know specifically about the hillside, but there's lots of options in the city.
I think the utility committee might get really busy.
Right. And you can look at other cities. I mean, you don't have to just go to Athens where they're very solar friendly. I can speak specifically to a township south of Columbus. It's the most conservative township in the county. My boyfriend also happens to live there. And it is, every entity and company is trying to put solar out in some of those fields because of the cost benefits. And so I just say that to say, I know politics sometimes gets wrapped up in renewables, but honestly, savings is savings.
Well, the state's been pushing it, the solar, I mean.
And there are benefits. The can't remember, Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, passed under the previous Congress. There were previously only benefits for solar for residents and businesses. Governments could not receive a benefit because we don't pay taxes, and those benefits were tax breaks. But the Inflation Reduction Act placed aside federal money to do exactly that. Since the city doesn't pay taxes on its income, they said, well, we'll just pay a portion of your bill for solar, your cost, to incentivize cities, villages, hospitals, so on and so forth. Government entities to go solar as well.
Is that kind of like a grant?
It's, yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay.
So I would make the recommendation that this is gonna have to come back to finance also, but personally, I'm not a fan of putting solar in an open field. Personally, I don't like taking up habitat. I don't like taking up parcels that were used for agriculture or potentially for, for future development. But that hillside is a perfect opportunity because it's undevelopable, really. We need a new roof on this building here, which would be an ideal place to put panels. And then you also have the water treatment plant, which has a very large, roof on that even. And even, some of that land there that isn't going to be usable land could be used for panels. To me, that's a thoughtful way of utilizing renewables, offsetting your expenses, but also not hindering you from future development on the situation. So if you're going to be spending money for a new roof.
And there's all those new roofs at the sewer plant, especially some south facing. I worked in solar for a year, so I'm just dangerous enough. But the south facing roofs is the roofs facing essentially the road. Those are great places for it because it's pretty open out down there.
You could put it on all the storage units that are there.
Storage.
Along that back road that goes, there are a lot of storage units there.
Yeah, I don't think that's
Maybe
our
not the city's
property.
not a storage building, maybe not the city, right?
They say you also put wind turbine up there.
Yep, and wind
Because
turbines.
there's businesses over in Columbus that have their own wind turbine up that to cut down the cost on and just go to their building.
The vertical wind turbines seem to be the most efficient and the least,
Environmental impact.
least environmental impact, meaning you don't lose birds and ducks and stuff. Bats will be a big thing around here. Environmentalists will be very, very big on the bats because, but the vertical ones are really efficient.
Can you explain how those work?
So instead of a large windmill with looks like a fan, right? You ever gone past a restaurant and you see those little round balls that are spinning on top of the roofs, maybe?
Yes.
Okay, similar to that,
Oh,
okay? They'll stand vertically, usually, they'll come in different heights, and a lot of them are like 4 feet, but they're like propellers on it, and they spin, vertically, but they're very space conscious too, so they don't take up a lot of space. And you can put them on your buildings, and
I think there's some now that they are physically vertical, and the wind basically runs to the center. I don't know if you've seen those.
Okay, I think I've seen small versions of those.
Yeah,
But yeah,
they're coming up with all kinds of cool stuff.
yeah, that's kind of like those little Dyson things where you can stick your.
Yeah, that's right. They kind of look like that.
They do,
Yeah.
kind of.
I see them usually by oceans, so maybe it's not great for the mountains, but I don't know. I know solar, I don't know when.
So I would make that recommendation to have, utility, when they start discussing it, have that discussion with, Michael Betts and have him reach out and maybe include some of that in. It's gonna be more expensive from the rip, like, if your roof's gonna cost you 50,000, it may cost you 80,000 to get the roof done with the panels, but the savings will potentially,
And
be
there
beneficial.
could be incentive programs out there. to do that.
Absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's 25% of the cost. I think that's what it is. Don't hold me to it, but I thought that's what I read, that Athens was using their newest, there was a new installment on Court Street, and I think there was further installment by the community center, wasn't there?
I'm not sure.
Anyway,
They took half the dog park for it, didn't they?
I don't remember.
The dog park that's over there up of,
Say,
that's the one by East State Street, I'm sorry.
okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
that's all right. They've had several, I think they've had several
Yeah.
projects. And then they have a 30-year life.
But that's ultimately, taxpayer money, and if you can reduce those amounts, control them a little bit better, then it gives you more money to be putting back in the streets and that people are really concerned about, so, yeah.
So in the sewer line item, I see insurance on the buildings. Is this referencing the plan?
Yes.
So
It's referencing everything.
everything with the sewer department.
Yeah, so that is how we split up our yearly pet public entities pool, which is our liability insurance on all of our property and.
Yeah, because I see a projected pretty good increase in that.
Yeah, oh, yes, because the values increase so much.
Okay,
So the rates are based on the value of the property.
all right.
I think I have to mention, I probably could go without mentioning, it's also based on claim history. Which includes litigation. So our claim history is not great.
Yeah,
So our rates have been going up.
okay.
Yeah. I felt the fiscal officer in me saying, I have to say this, even though it's not a great topic, but,
Right.
sorry, other questions? All right. The next fund, there are other funds in between. The next fund's the water fund. That's the 700 series, the first number being 700. It's also several pages long. Seeing as it's our busiest fund of the city. This fund looks very similar to last year. It essentially increases costs. These numbers will be rounded off, by the way. This is why I say it's a first draft. So I'm gonna round these numbers off so that they're presentable to council and the public. There also will be fewer numbers, so it's easier to read, I promise. The final product will be easier to read. But essentially, a lot of these line items stay the same. You will see the very large number, 3.8 million. That's the revenues and expenses I would like to move out to an actual water project fund. That's at the very end of the water fund. I maintain in here, I spoke with the service director, maintain in here investments in both water line improvements, equipment improvements, water loss reduction projects. You'll see 100,000. Basically, line items that the council in the past has set aside money to try and decrease the rate of lost water and lost time, so that costs do not continue to balloon the way they have. Because if that water runs out into the hillside, we all have to pay for it anyway. It doesn't matter that it ran out to the hillside, we still have to pay for it. So we try to keep these line items, including catastrophic failure. You may remember years past where water was lost across the entire city. We were spending a ton of money because we were unprepared for that type of thing. So we not only have contingency plans to help prevent that in the future, but also money set aside so that we can effectively, how do I say this, effectively hire vendors or use equipment with the knowledge that there's money there, and that I'm trying to avoid saying getting ripped off. I'm basically trying to say planning well so that vendors don't get to charge us double for fixing catastrophic failures. Just think of actually, I don't want to say that. It's just always better to plan ahead. It's always better to plan ahead. What else? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I have a question. I see a software fund, but it has no money listed on there. Would that be the software for our app that we have been promised but never been able to utilize?
So that's a good question. Let me make sure.
Is that under water plant?
Which line? Yeah, I was gonna say, which one you
That
looking at?
software was 725.
I see it.
Yeah, there's nothing, appears nothing to the right. I just wasn't sure what software that was, because I think we've already paid
Yes,
for some of that, but we still don't seemingly have the usage of that app.
that's right. We are closer. I will tell you that. We've had several meetings. I had my staff undergo a training for it. It is quite possible. So here's my thinking. I'll just give you my thinking.
Yeah.
It's quite possible that to avoid a new person from having to do that project, if I'm not the auditor in 1 or 2 years, that we launch it with just 93% of the residents on it, and those other folks in businesses, and those other folks who don't have those new meters just will never be able to utilize it. The original plan we drew up was that the district would be replaced 100%, the meters, and then we could launch it and say, everybody can use this app. And as you know, we never got to it.
If they do replace the remaining of those meters, they'll be able to come online, wouldn't they?
They would.
Okay.
Yes. I don't know this from personal experience, but they had said to us, it is much messier because what happens is a resident thinks they're doing something wrong, and then they complain to their friends, and it creates bad impressions, and they complain on Facebook, and they come in and say, this app is stupid, I think it's dumb. But really the issue is that they just don't have a new meter to read it. And if you have enough of those, it creates the impression that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
When in reality, we're at like 94%. It's quite possible that within 6 months that I just pull the trigger and say, we're going with 94% and cut our losses, because
Send everybody else a postcard that doesn't have a new meter yet.
yeah,
Make yourself a note to tell us that.
that when we launch it,
Yeah.
so there'll be we'll do a huge launch and
Oh,
try to notify. In fact, we may do a mailing just so that everybody knows. That was the original plan.
And to be honest, some of those folks may be older folks that maybe don't do apps on their phone anyway, so they may not really.
Right.
It doesn't, it doesn't matter to them.
Yep, that's right. During our training, so this took place actually in September, if I remember right. We identified that there was a data error. So it's actually with your account. If you remember, it was working, then it wasn't.
Right.
In that training, we used one of your accounts, and because I asked for that, because I was like, well, this one won't work, and it did. And so that'll be a good one to test. And we found a data error in the way the system was processing our utility accounts. So thank you for the help. You don't even know you helped us. But you probably saved me 100 other people just like that.
Yeah.
Who said this darn thing will refuse us to work. But
No, I'm very excited when it comes online.
Yeah.
Take your time, hurry up.
yeah. So, yes, so, let's see.
Are we still on the water?
Yes,
Okay, I got a couple of questions.
yeah,
We have 3 wellheads. Is that correct?
yes,
Um,
I believe so.
is there projected repair cost or maintenance on those for 25?
There are, they're not actually in this draft,
Okay,
because I'm not sure what they total to, but the water plant operator has been getting quotes from, I think they were called Ballinger, as well as, the manufacturer of our plant, it's escaping me who they were, Artesian, maybe, for fixes to those wellheads, because one needs major work, and then there's a major piece at that water plant, a major, this is all above my expertise running a water plant, but I just know there's another major repair needed, that he was hopeful to get this year. I think he might be able to afford one with what line items he has left, but several others are on deck for next year. And that's not in here, but it'll be under plant improvements, which is 720. It's actually the last, it's actually the last line.
repairs or which one?
It's the last line in that 720 series, 720, it says plant improvements.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
Yep,
So the projected improvement cost for 25 is $564,000.
actually, that's a total of that column.
Oh, that column, okay.
Yeah, it says 13, that's what the model spit out.
Yeah, it's a little hard to read the line.
I know.
With the bifocals, they don't focus in.
It's gonna be better, I promise. The 13 is just based off what he has spent. But the
Okay.
truth is that when we can nail down what we think it'll actually cost, they're large numbers. He's gonna have to
Yeah.
bid some of them. They're like 75.
Yeah.
I think the one was like 96, the first quote, so.
100,000.
96,000,
Oh.
yeah.
So that's another topic that needs to bounce to the utility committee. Because we need to take not just repair one in need, but we need to look at all 3 of them wellheads. And if we can qualify for some assistance, that'd be great.
Well, it's not just at the plant, but our water loss. The city was really working its water loss down.
Yeah.
And that has very clearly plateaued, has not changed in well over a year, maybe 2 years, actually. And water loss, of course, means water running through the pipes, but then it doesn't make it to the house. It doesn't get metered. And it's a lot. It's a lot.
So with that,
It's about half. So it's
still about half.
It started it started at 67%.
I remember it was, yeah.
And it's moved down, but it has not continued moving. And you might say, in fact, I can hear a little, in the back of my head saying, Taylor, you say all the time, we're within the averages around Southeast Ohio. This is one place we're not. Some cities do much better than 50%.
We're doing better now because of the water line replacements. That's where they fixed a bunch of those leaks.
That's right.
So it has come down. When phase 4 gets done with everything, with replacing the water lines and the sewage going through there, it should even do more.
It should, every line should do, it's, because it's old lines is what's happening,
Mhm.
or shifting ground, or just a number of things. So yeah, every line replacement should help.
It's kind of a mixed bag with some of those lines, because when you do change them, yes, you save water line loss here, but it adds more pressure to it, a line.
So an old section down.
Another section, so that's,
Then it
So that's
pops.
hopefully we can continue on with some more repairs and replacement on our own. I know Jason had been talking about doing that with his guys on his own, taking strips or streets and fixing them, which means we'll tear them up, but hopefully we'll be able to tear them up, do those projects on our own, and then maybe pave them the following year, and then there'll be settled and taken care of. So yeah, we'll just have to keep every year replacing some until they're all replaced, I think. So,
And keeping it's crazy to even say out loud because the project's not closed, but keeping the meters, on a good replacement schedule because they decline in efficiency every single year, essentially every day, but you measure it in a year. And I believe they reached their recommended, replacement date at 10 to 12 years. And we started that project 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're actually, I mean, we're a good bit through the meter life cycle.
by the time we get them all
Right.
replaced, we'll be starting over.
Right, we can be starting a pipeline for a new project. But that's another thing, is that meters run down to lower efficiency, which is, the recommended is above 80. So at 10 years, essentially 1/5 of the water running the meter actually is not being metered. Correct. Because it gets less efficient.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that,
So, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, there are large line items you might notice, like I said, water loss reduction, large equipment, operating supplies. Those are places where we've invested before and continue to invest to try and keep that water loss down, which is a savings in the long run. Okay.
So this next question is not gonna be, popular.
Okay.
Do we project any water rate increases for 25?
So the financial plan, the financial projection, I don't wanna call it commitment, but a projection that the city entered into for the phases of the water projects, plans for 4.
A 4% increase? Okay, and the city manager sets that, not council.
That's right, yeah. I put 4 on the sewer as well, I believe that's what it says.
Yeah, I was gonna follow up, could drop back to the sewer.
Yeah, I believe it says, I'll double check those. I know I double checked one of them, I just can't remember which one now. Before this evening. But then again, those financial projections too are based on old expense data, meaning not this year's, and they're also based on different ideas of what we have in reserve. And so when we run those again and update those, could be better, could be worse, but.
So we should anticipate a water sewer rate increase at the first of the year? Okay,
I would think so. I mean, council has the right to say no
right.
to a sewer rate, and you guys have all the authority there. But I believe, and I can produce those reports for you, I believe those reports do have a recommended.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Let's see. All right. So investments in the water plant, investments in the water system. We covered those. Let me get my bearings here. I don't think there's water debt line items you can see here at the very end of the 700 series. Okay, I think that covers it. So, moving on, I'm gonna roll back to the 600 funds, about halfway through the packet. Obviously, the first numbers will be 600 as well. That is our capital improvement fund. That's where 10% of the city's income tax is split into to save for capital improvement upgrades that include infrastructure and equipment that lasts at least 5 years. There's also a charter section on it too. So charter's the discussion of the season. You'll notice a few things, 50,000 for sidewalks upgrades. That was actually budgeted for 24 as well. That is the sidewalk upgrades on Fayette Street. It's called the Mobility Corridor. I believe the state's paying 5/6 of that, and we're paying 1/6. But ODOT's paying for a large portion of that, I do know. That's the city match. That project has not commenced, so that's why it's on 25 again, unspent. You will notice some pool upgrades. That number is actually lower in 24 because there were some pressures from the general fund, which we are building to, where I had to pull down some equipment for police and fire into the 600 fund, but specifically also the increase in the fire truck cost, the new fire truck, which you'll see there, lease payments on the fire truck. As well as park improvements. I've held this amount in the city hall renovation. The reason being is because of the conversation about the general fund in a little bit here. We're not just mindlessly renovating at city hall. We actually have, it was brought to our attention today of all days, that there's sun coming through the walls in the police department. It should not be doing that. So in general, the building's very old. There's actually some nature growth of the ceiling outside this room here where water's getting in.
Natural light's better.
Natural light's better, that's right. And then the roof, if you drive past City Hall, you'll notice that corner with the police department, the roof's coming up. And the roof is about at its life cycle for the city building as well. There's a number of, you'll remember this old carpet in here that was coming up and gross and terrible. There's a lot of things that he fixed at this building. We've slowly, with the money available, which hasn't been a lot, been fixing some of those things. I hold this placeholder here because the general fund's under some pressure. So that's why I placed some in capital in case that would be a better place to spend those funds for.
So that number looks like 25,000.
That's right.
So I got some questions, Mr. Shepperton.
Yeah.
So you said capital improvement is currently 10% still of the, okay. So we used to have a different split at one point on there. Would it be your recommendation to maintain the current split of income tax revenue, more or less, based on, I know our projected revenues have increased based on utilization of RETA. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my recommendation is you kind of can see it in the budget numbers here, but just to officially say it is to leave it the way it is. I say that because there's a lot of equipment needs and a lot of infrastructure needs here at the city building, but also the general fund is in a place. I've said this several times. It has caused some worries amongst the staff, and I've tried to discuss that and take it head on with some of the folks. But I have said, as you guys know in here, that the sky's not falling, but the portion of the general fund that is hardest to fix, which is wages, have grown to such a degree in 24 to be a challenge for the next 3 to 5 years. And so I would rather that option be available to you folks in the future if we reached a truly more severe circumstance than we will be in 25. And in the meantime, of course, continue upgrading our equipment.
Okay. Next, I think, unfortunately, I think like your number there for the renovations is probably low for City Hall, just because if you do need a new roof, this roof's going to be easily over 50 grand to do. So you're less than half, for sure. So to me, I think looking at that and possibly getting quotes on that would be prudent to ensure that you put the appropriate amount in that line item for that improvement. Currently in the parks, we're looking to do a lot of work, towards grants on that. So hopefully that'll offset that. And the pool also, I'm a little concerned about, which we're going to talk in Parks and Rec. We're still losing water at the pool, and we know we're going to need money for repair. But I think we need to have a discussion about that in terms of what that actually is going to look like, and how much money we're going to budget for that.
Yeah, the whole pool facility, I mean, we tried repairs in the pool unsuccessfully, and it might be time to look at a whole new liner. But there's been discussion that the pool house itself needs updated, upgraded pool equipment, and what condition is the pumps in the pump house in. So if we look at the pool as a whole, yeah, it needs some major TLC.
My viewpoint needs more TLC because it's in a bad location in my viewpoint. So, but it is what it is.
Well, we can always explore it. It's actually been brought to my attention too about considering, doing a whole new facility. But then where would you put it is the question,
That's the only thing is where to put it, but where it's at right now with all the major traffic and everything, you're gonna kind of continually have problems there because of the vibrations gonna fracture your cement in the building. It's gonna put wear and tear on the building and it's gonna get all your underground pipes. So we'll just keep throwing money and throwing money and throwing money at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you don't want to throw good money after bad. So, and it's the truth. That's probably why our pipes cracked and why we have a leak. So, from all the vibrations.
The pool is now how old? I don't recall when that was.
It's finished.
25. It's
25
I
years.
think it was finished in
I-
01 or 02, wasn't it?
I would have thought the life the lifespan of the pool would have been a lot longer than where we're at right now. So,
It did. I mean, you can
It's
tell.
close to 20, I don't know about 25, because I know it's not 25 because I got here in 2001 and the pool was built after I got here.
so we should not be in the position we're in right now with it. So, yeah,
You can tell I mean, it needs things like a roof on the
Yeah.
buildings and, the slide and the stairs. You can tell looking at it, they're aged. Yeah, I don't know anything about fixing pools, but, any voter or taxpayer can tell that we'll need to invest in that. in the coming years.
absolutely.
Yes, I agree, by the way, with the point on the city. There's actually a number buried up in the general fund of 50,000 for city hall, and to be honest, even put together, those numbers are not enough, so, we have an old building problem. We have an old building problem. This number does include the new fire truck, if I didn't say that, and this actually spins down. The capital improvement is expected to bring in, almost 251,000. It spins down the balance of capital by about 40,000. There's 300,000 in there. One of the reasons that seemed justified, council can decide in the end, of course. To me, it seemed justified to allow some of these line items to stay instead of cutting them, because the fire truck purchase is done. We were saving in the capital improvement fund for years, a little bit at a time, to afford a potential large down payment. We of course found ourselves in a spot where that's not necessary. So bringing it closer to its historic average of around 200,000 is more than acceptable in my mind.
So that we don't have that 80,000 on there, you're saying, for the fire truck?
No, it will be on there because that'll cover the two payments, the 2015 one as well as the new one.
The fire department equipment, is that like their
Turnout gear, bunker gear, I think is the term.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
I have some good news. One of my friends told me that since Harry has gotten that 3 on the rating, her insurance has gone down $500 a year.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Any other questions about capital?
And then the police department, you got the payments on the cruisers and then their equipment. What's the 30,000 for the police equipment?
So that is shifting, so out of the general fund, so that number is usually there, it's just usually smaller. Out of the general fund, they spend money on, equipment either, for the vehicles, or on their bodies or in the office. For example, I think they used to, matching to a grant to get a response drone for like forest, issues out in the woods. just one example. But it's basically a transfer. So the general fund's under pressure. I've cut, you'll see, the proposed budget shows a lower equipment budget. The general fund tries to make up for it down here.
Would it be the equipment for the new, fitness facility? The new gym we're building for?
I don't know. I don't know if that's their intended use or not, to be honest. That would be a,
Because we're, by their contract, we're required.
that's right. Contract requires it.
But ultimately, I'm hoping that also saves maybe some money on the other side on the insurance aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I see in the storm flood upgrades.
Yep.
We've had discussion about, and I don't see any funding for that.
We've included, the reason it's not there, you guys are the bosses in the end.
Yeah,
I think it's 25,000 was set there, which is not much for storm, but
no,
it was set there 3 or 4 years in a row. I don't think we've ever spent it. So when we go to look at these, basically we try to make a reasonable estimate of whether a line item will be used or not. So I left it at 0. We can, of course, change that. You guys can change that.
so there has been discussion in the past about potential assessments to properties for water runoff to help fund storm drain upgrades. I know that's another topic that's not real popular, but our system is, it's bad.
Pre-New, in many places it's pre-New Deal.
Yeah.
For maybe some of the, if there's any teenagers or youngsters watching, New Deal would be 80 years ago, and many of the parts of the system are well before that. So it's very aged.
So that can be a further discussion down the road, but something's gonna have to be addressed.
I almost feel like there's gotta be a plan to tackle the entire system and, you know what I mean? I think it needs to be, like a capital improvement plan. It has to be something I think that is, thought through.
Yeah, identify where to start,
Yeah,
because I'm assuming it puts more strain on our sewer treatment plant with some of the issues that we have.
mhm.
So.
I do think there are some state and federal funds, particularly it's a big example, but one of the things covered at conference was City of Philadelphia upgrading storm with the Inflation Reduction Act, second time coming through. Of course, they have a different storm problem since they're closer to the ocean, but the number one thing, in fact, one of the things I certify, if you ever look at project documents, like the water and sewer projects, one of the things I have to certify as auditor is that the council has set a dedicated revenue source to this type of project. So for example, water, it's water rates. So to be honest, we're back to that first square, which is that there are funding sources, but they're gonna ask council first. They're gonna ask me essentially, has council set any storm rates to pay this debt back? And obviously we have no storm rates. So you're right. Someday the storm system will need fixed.
Well, that day's passed.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, it needs fixed right now. But there's currently no funding.
I think there needs to be a whole, that's almost a separate discussion on just focusing on that and trying to go through the process of creating the revenue stream. We probably don't even have them mapped. You know what I mean? We've been going through and mapping our new water lines and our sewer lines as we've been replacing them, but we probably don't even have the storm sewers even mapped. So, which is, yeah, it's a whole process. I think
I know it's been brought up a couple of years in a row that it really needs to get off the ground now.
I mean, we've got old I&I reports that you might be able to go through and maybe, I'm sure all that information is still the same if it's not worse, right? So you gotta be able to go through and maybe can you start fixing some of it? I don't know. I surely don't want to be tearing up any roads that we just paved, but
I can keep moving.
Yeah, something positive.
That's right. So, there's some small funds here, not really worth discussion, things like DUI and drug enforcement, you'll see a few $100s. Those are fines that are ceded to the city when somebody's arrested with cash, essentially, for major felonies. We get, I think, the smallest portion. Doesn't really matter, it's only a few $100. Let me rephrase, it does matter, but for this long meeting in your guys' evening, maybe another time. The 300 fund is the pool and parks fund. It is pretty straightforward. None of the pool repairs, for example, or park repairs come from this fund. This is just pure operating cost. This is the park levy voters have approved. Pool revenues as well as 2% of the income tax supplement this fund. And it's just basically to run pool and parks, fix them, not even really fix them, but the basics. The only thing I think might show up weird to you is it looks like salaries and wages for the pool are down. That's actually not true. The model thinks that these numbers should be run for the entire year. And of course, the pool only operates about 4 months on a long season. So the actual salaries and wages used this year is much closer to that 57,000. I think it's like 58.5 now. So 60 is a reasonable expectation. But other than that, honestly, very standard funds that not a ton of revenue, but they do a lot for our community. When we get into the 200 series, which is 200, 211, 220, and 213, these are our street funds. They're separated because of requirements for state law. I really wish they were all together. It'd be easier for you and me. But we call them the 200 series because there's several of them, and they all work on the streets. There's even actually, I think I found the typo here. I'm going to make sure I fix this tomorrow. Not relevant to the numbers here, but anyhow, so the street levy, the 230 fund, that's where the funds go that the voters approve and will hopefully approve the renewal this fall, this November. Goes to things like street debt projects paid for by street debt, road salt, which is very expensive if nobody knew. And then the other general costs, patching, paving, other general costs for the streets. The 220 fund supplements that. You may not know this, but when you renew your tags, there is a state and local portion on your receipt. The local portion is split, I believe, 3 ways. And one of those 3 ways goes to us. It's a small amount, about 20,000 a year, but helps with our streets. 20,000 can do a little bit, a little bit for our streets. And then we get up to the 210 and 200. Those are gas tax funds. And you'll see there street repairs, street debt payments, fuel and operating costs for the crews to work on them while they're patching. These numbers are almost identical to this year, if that helps.
so does this have and I didn't see it in capital improvement, but does this have our portion of Canal Street?
Actually, so it doesn't, because we are expected to outlay that full amount this year.
Okay.
ODOT wants their money up front.
Gotcha.
I sent an email actually to the council president, I think Mr. Robe and Mr. Tolliver. The expectation, how do I put this? There's either been a miscommunication or misunderstanding on how soon that would be. So I'm asking council at the next meeting to authorize the full release of those funds we've been saving back for Canal Street. Because I didn't I thought it would come over time, like most of our projects.
Yeah.
If you have 10% of the project, you pay 10% of your match.
Yeah.
This one is all upfront. ODOT takes it and handles it from there.
Yeah, they put it in their bank account and collect interest on it until April or May when they decide to do the
Yeah,
project.
Pretty much. Anyway, I didn't expect that, so I've got pending legislation asking for that, at the next meeting.
And that was 400,000.
Yep. I don't know if it was 400 even, but
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
I'm gonna write Mr. DeWine a letter, I want my interest back.
that's right, we want the interest, or at least apply to the project. Yes, so that, we will outlay that this fall, as soon as council can act, and I can write a check. And I think that's it on that. That comes from the street levy direct, just for the record. The street levy, we've been saving for a few years from the street levy in expectation that we would be able to do this project, fix Canal Street, Baroque Boulevard. We of course had this discussion at the last council meeting. I believe it was that, Canal is one of the worst streets in town. It's literally crumbling when you look at it. And this is a much needed project. So the street levy funds goes directly to your street, and you'll see it in action,
Please vote
especially,
for it.
especially next year. Please vote for it.
That's the 400,000, the street levy fund.
Yes, the 230, okay. We actually thought, not that it really matters today, the 200 fund, the street construction fund, we thought we would have to lower the road repair funds. I know nobody likes that. But because of the amount of outlay for the Canal Street, as well as a couple other things that we thought were gonna happen, they did not, which is good. So street repair, still just as strong for next year, which is good.
So that looks like, 150,000.
150,000.
Yeah.
That's right. Specifically, that fund is our portion of the gas tax. When you fill up the tank in town, we get roughly 48% of that tax, of the state tax. We get nothing from the feds. And that's all the funds but general. We ready to tear apart general? Questions, thoughts, concerns? I haven't said this, but the assumption with all of those funds we just had, all of those funds, the rec fund always runs close. Let me give that caveat. The recreation and pool fund, it always runs within 10, 20,000 of zero. Because it doesn't have a lot of revenue at 150,000, 146. All the other funds, I'm comfortable saying I have no concerns about their financial health. So that's why we didn't really talk about the bigger picture for those funds as far as their balances, because they fortunately are in good shape for 2025. So general fund, a little more stress. Not sky is falling. I kind of started to say it earlier and then didn't finish. I've talked with a lot of employees. I've said in this council chambers, sky is not falling, but there is stress. Wages have increased in the general fund, which is the 100 fund. It's the first 1, 2, 3, 4 pages of your packet, because I think you're just one-sided paper, right? Okay, so first 4 pages. The reason wages, I put this in asterisk at the top because I wanted to cover this first. The reason that this fund stresses me a little bit, and that there's been some changes to it in this proposal to try and prevent bigger issues down the road, is because of the difference in how wages versus equipment impact a fund like this. Equipment, you buy something, it's done. You might fix it, but the fix is going to be much less than the buying, and then you replace it in 3 years or 5 years, whatever its lifespan is. Wages are every year. They grow every single year. They never go down. Insurance never goes down. Pension never goes down. Wages never goes down. They also grow often at inflation or higher, because our folks need to afford to feed themselves, right? So you can't grow it slower than inflation usually, or they're falling behind. So one of the things about this fund, I'll just start with the police at the very first page. You'll notice some things like the operating supplies are cut back. Repairs and maintenance don't grow. Educational, they're on track to spend 15,000 this year, but I have 10,000 for next year. This is a proposal I went over with the chief. He obviously wants more. I mean, that every department head should want more at all times. That's their job, to invest in their departments. But some of these numbers are cut back because the increase in wages, which you can see at the top. In fact, I sent the number to the both chiefs and said, your equipment lines do drop in the general fund, including the fire department, quite precipitously, actually, if you look at it, for both of them. However, the wage increases bring their total budgets to double-digit increases. So both departments actually increased by double digits, well over 15%. But it's all wages. Over time, what concerns me is that revenues in the last 2 years grew at 1.4%, but expenses grew at 3.6% in that fund. We were at the other, for the last 4 years before that, we were the other direction. Revenues grew faster than expenses. Sky's not falling, but some of the decisions in here try to set the city up for success in the next 3 years, so that hard decisions don't have to be made. In this draft you're looking at, brings the expenses total to 2.521 million. I actually did the math for you off to the side. If you guys pass the reserve policy, there's that number. It's actually a little bit lower than I thought, but 1,008,000 would be an appropriate reserve for the general fund at that number. But the revenue expected is 2.480, assuming we can have a good year. And in the next year, I actually do the number for you again. And they're not labeled, it's a first draft, but 2.611 is what the expenses grow to next, while revenues only grow to 2.515. And that's without an economic downturn. So within 2 years, we'll have spent 6 digits in reserves, which concerns me a little bit. And this is also not done. So the department heads haven't, I'm not at the point where I can confidently say that all the departments feel that this is what they're good with. So there may be further requests, line items where somebody says, I can't do that. So, questions, thoughts? I know that's a high level. Police, I should say police and fire is pretty clearly laid out. Some areas where there's uncertainty, city manager, administrative assistant costs. It was an estimate, but it was an estimate based on a year with no administrative assistant. So if council moves to act on that number will change. And things like, if you look in the law director, it's 100,340. Excuse me again. It's not actually the law director's money, I should say, but you'll notice the other employee cost. Those line items like that are where the city has paid for things like litigation. So that number is a pure shot in the dark. That number could be higher.
Which number is that one?
The 15,000 under 100,340, and it says other employee costs.
Thank you.
You'll see this year's number is already much higher than that. So there are some areas where, and then of course, city hall renovations, we already just talked about 50,000 isn't even enough to fix the roof. And that's what's sitting there. So there are some areas where actually expenses could conceivably be much higher than what is set aside here. That's another reason it gives me some pause. my goal in drafting this was to create a 2025 general fund budget that both met the needs of the community, the departments, but also had a less than six-figure deficit. It does have that. It has an estimated 41,000, but that's before some of those things we just said where conceivably it could go higher. Sky's not falling, but hopefully some of these decisions set us up for future success. The one thing I will say is that the council will have to be serious. I don't know about in this budget cycle, meaning in fall of 24, but certainly in 25, we've got to address that top number, that asterisk. What are we going to do to stop wage growth from growing higher than our revenue growth? Because what happens is eventually those numbers will just continue getting worse. They've already crossed each other. They'll just get worse and worse. I'll tell you what happens at other places, which is that essentially the can is kicked for 5 years, and then you read about it in the newspaper when they lay off 25% of staff. And the city's been in a position where the can was kicked, for example, before fiscal emergency, and I'm hopeful that this council this year and next year can appropriately get this under control. Thoughts or questions?
I'll start.
I will say this deficit number started at 260,000. So a lot of expenses were unpacked from the general fund. If you just took this year's, added the increases to the general fund, we were over $250,000 deficit just in the general fund. Right. So this took some work. Sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
So in the police department, there's been a little misconception for 2024 that there was a lot of overtime being spent in the police department. When I look at this, it shows 0. Is that correct?
It's a little deceiving. That
Okay.
line item should be retired. So our system now takes all wages, overtime, holiday, vacation, all from the salaries and wages line. So the overtime is built into that 830 number.
So you mean retired, like crossed off?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the overtime line, honestly, I should just close it. If the system will let me, but I don't know what the percentage is this year, to be honest. This budget plans for a 10%. So in other words, 83,000
In overtime.
in overtime. I will tell you, in emergency services, 10% is a tough goal. It's what we set for this year. I don't think we hit it. But it's tough for any emergency department. There are departments that run overtime rates much higher, 3 times, 4 times.
Have police and fire been running overtime this year? A lot?
There's overtime for sure. I can get you guys a report. I don't think it's under 10%. But I didn't check it before this meeting. I hate to say it and be wrong. Sure. I do know the last payroll was. I only know that because I congratulated the chief. I said, hey, he was under 10% last payroll. He actually brought it up to me in his defense. He said I probably should have even brought it up, but he is actively working to pull down some overtime for certain types of overtime that he's not happy with, not satisfied with, which is why he brought it up. And I told him, hey, you under 10.
So the 3 department heads have not finalized their needs for 25? Is that what I'm understanding?
I believe we're close. I think there's a little bit of haggling on a few line items, but I think we're close. Jason's the most comfortable with this, I'll tell you that. Jason's most comfortable with this. But his situation's different. His wages increased 7% or 8%. And the wages in the police and fire increased much larger than that. More than double.
Oh, you're talking about Jason. I was thinking Justin, never mind, okay.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I was wrong person, sorry.
So when those wages increase at that amount, naturally, it happens anywhere. When wages increase that amount, operating and equipment suffer. But I think we're close. And to their credit, I want to give them credit, by the way. The delay is not on their part. To be honest, I've been working on this. I've told the council president on the phone, I might as well say for posterity, for the public, I've been working on that general fund budget for weeks.
Yes,
I ran numbers with equipment cut, with it cut even worse than it is now, there's a valid question. I actually said this to one of you folks when you called me about it. I said, if I was on council, it'd be a valid question. Do I want to cut equipment because I want a state-of-the-art effective department? And I think that's a valid question to ask. But the draft I've proposed to you is no staffing changes, and it makes up for the gap elsewhere. But I tried to look at it at every angle and see what can actually be done. This was the path of least resistance, I'd say.
So one thing we haven't talked about really is, mayor's court. And that's revenue that would offset our police and code expenses. Do we have a date when we think that might be up and running?
We tried, but I wasn't aware that the officers were still sending down to Athens.
Gotcha.
And there was only 2 issues that came before the court. And that particular night, it was brought up to me that we couldn't charge properly the court cost.
Gotcha.
So I was taken aback by the whole thing. I was totally shocked.
Did Mr. Rhodes say that he thought it would be resolved this month? We could have mayor's court, or?
I sent a note out that I thought that we should have had a hearing tonight and one on the 28th or 24th.
Okay.
And they sent back and said, well, it's just impossible to have it tonight. And what can I do?
Yeah, so hopefully by the end of the year, we'll at least get it up and running, just to get that process moving again, so.
Well, I would like for them to keep me up to date what they're doing,
That'd be nice.
because I haven't been.
You're kind of an pretty integral part of that process, I would think.
Well, he
Yes, I understand.
Yes, it could be serious revenue. Yeah, I've seen it, just in my time here, I've seen it reach over 50,000 a year, and that's post bypass, when it used to be 6 figures. But the bypass was not there.
Right.
And this year, you'll notice through August, it was 7,900, so certainly a big gap. No fault of Nancy's.
no, absolutely
No,
not,
definitely.
absolutely not.
I thought I would bring it up. I hadn't heard anything recently, so, and I think it would add to our revenue numbers. That would help offset,
And just from a city point of view, isn't it easier for them to come here than to go to Athens?
for sure.
It is.
A lot of the people don't have transportation to get there.
Well, and it increases the city's cost of our officers if they have to appear in court. So
Overtime, there you go.
But the thing of it is, those officers having to appear are few in between. I can remember that when I was a clerk. You have an officer here to keep, everyone nice and neat and
Right.
pretty, but very seldom do you ever have to call an officer in. That's just.
So mayor's court also involves code enforcement.
Yes.
So if we talk about code enforcement, the revenue there, some of it is a rental registration fee. And currently we're at $30. It's been suggested that possibly increasing that. But what I would like to see is how much have we collected in 2024 from the rental registration?
Which we should know that number. We used to have a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
We should know that.
so,
I have the number for 24 on the revenue packet, the one with the bold at the top, that says revenue expectations. It's, as of August 31st, I just lost my spot. As of August 31st, 12,480 on track, excuse me, for around 24,000. The
So
reason the schedule's funny on the rental registration, it's due in January 1st or something like that. And so like a bunch of folks pay early and a bunch of folks pay after in 24 or in the next year. So that's why you see that 12,000 number, because that was basically folks who paid for this year in the first half of the year. And the second batch will be people paying for next year. In the next few months. But it's much lower than it originally, I was on council when that number was proposed, and I remember the numbers were between 30 and 35,000. So we're certainly coming in much lower than.
yeah, the trend has been there's potentially fewer rental properties than what there used to be.
That's true. There are fewer, but I think there's also some that aren't paying.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yes.
Airbnb fit into that at all?
Lodging tax.
Yeah, they pay the lodging instead.
And there's been discussion of, which I'm sure is now up in the air, but potentially expanding the code office. But in our current situation, that probably is not feasible.
Personally, I think the code office has to become better and more efficient before we even discuss that.
Yeah.
There has to be policy, procedure, protocol. There has to be just a better system overall, enforcement. Or I would personally consider investing any more money into it right now. And by the way, the Airbnb thing is actually a national issue.
Yes.
If you recall, a couple years ago, we had that older couple come in and complain about their whole street being Airbnbs. And I think they ended up moving out of town. And that's the issue that Airbnbs, by the way, are having nationally right now. A lot of people are complaining about it because they're losing their neighborhoods. I'm not opposed to Airbnbs by any means. I keep talking about it, but if we don't have a planning commission meeting about it, it's never gonna go anywhere. But Granville has a great example of how they manage theirs. They've divided their village up into zones. And so, and you're only allowed to have certain ones, so they like protect the integrity of the historic downtown area with only not as many or whatever. And then if you get further out where it's a little bit more rural in the community, you can have unlimited amount. You gotta get permits, you gotta get you pay an annual fee for that. And then if you decide to not use that property for an Airbnb anymore, then the waiting list, the next person on has the ability to buy the license. It's all on their website. It's got a map. It'll show you where every one of them is. It'll explain to you the zones. I think personally we should adopt something like that. No sense in reinventing the wheel. Copy paste, and that way you can protect the integrity of the neighborhoods too, so you don't lose that, but still you're offering Airbnbs, because I think Nelsonville is an area where people would like to stay in an Airbnb. But my personal thoughts, but we'll see.
On that note, the one fund we didn't cover was the 120. the Economic Development Fund, which is funded solely by the lodging tax, which is at this point, unless I'm forgetting one, it's one hotel and all the rest Airbnbs, right? In city limits. And,
At the moment,
yeah, and, the revenue, it was pitiful. In 2018 and 19, it was a few $100s a year. We've gotten it up to, just about reach 25,000 a year, and that's still with a few holdouts. Folks who should be paying who, aren't collecting it from their customers. That said, that fund has almost been completely unutilized. So we use it to pay for the fireworks celebration, well, part of the fireworks celebration, as well as we give a grant to the Parade of the Hills each year. But other than that, it's just.
How much is in that fund currently?
I hate to say the wrong number, but I think it's, I didn't bring a cash statement. I believe it's around 65,000.
which we've talked before about having that, using some of that funds to upgrade the comprehensive plan. And that would be, I mean, I think a great project. And then we really need to start using that comprehensive plan when we're applying for monies, grant monies, et cetera, for projects in the city. Makes all those projects shovel ready. It's cheaper than some of the engineering that you need to have done.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, the comprehensive plan needs to be updated. As you said, it ties in everything, and our capital improvement plan. We spent $75,000 on that initially, and it has never been updated since it was brought forward. It truly needs to be.
And that was over 2 decades ago, right?
Yes,
oh, yeah.
It was,
2004 or 5, somewhere in there,
yeah.
20 years ago.
I've got an original on my desk.
So
It is fun to see the things the city did adopt.
Yeah,
But then
absolutely.
there's also that, that what if feeling when you read it, because there's significant things the city did not do and adopt, specifically pertaining to housing and tourism. But yes, that's a very common use. Folks use their economic development funds. They have to go towards bettering, shaping, strategizing for the city's economy. That's kind of a general way of saying you can't just put new lights at City Hall with it, for example. So comprehensive plan is a big use. People use the economic development funds for. Because it's very expensive. Those consultants are very expensive.
When you're talking about economic development, on the Parade of the Hills grant, it was 7,500 this year, and then next year it says 5,000. Is that a typo?
It's where the math is funky. So it's because we write one $5,000 check, and the model basically thinks there's going to be additional funds paid to the Parade of the Hills between now and December.
Okay.
Essentially, yes. What we gave in a grant this year was 5,000. It will not be.
Oh, so it
75.
wasn't 7,500.
Yeah, it's projecting the balance.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Thoughts, questions?
I do have, dropping back to the beginning, the American Rescue Plan Fund, do you know offhand what the balance left in that is?
I don't know offhand. It's low. It's in the 20,000 range or lower. It's just
Yeah.
about spent.
Just about gone?
Yep.
Okay, so,
That was one of the places I told you the line items there. There it is. It thinks they're gonna grow at the natural projection here, but that's actually all wrong. That's just my mistake. It's become such a non-factor, I didn't even think to adjust it to its correct ones for you guys tonight.
right.
That's how low it's gotten. But the correct amount will be there. It'll be, in fact, if it's conceivable, because one of the projects being paid out of that is the mobile work orders. When we originally, not that long ago, 5 years ago, less, 3 years ago, every work order here was printed and given to another person to go fix something. And then that person wrote on it out in the field and brought it back. And then it was shuffled and processed and, as you can imagine with paperwork, lost, ripped, ruined, dropped into a manhole, just everything. So we've been working on mobile work order projects since the American Rescue Plan was passed. Council authorized it September of 23. And we actually have a soft launch date for November for those, where essentially we will be able to send a work order. A customer calls in and says they've got water in their yard. We will be able to enter it in the computer. And it'll show up on an iPad for the crews. And Jason can assign which crew. So if his crews are busy, he can assign it to Bruce or somebody at the water plant to go do instead, or maybe the sewer plant. They'll go do it, take a picture, fill out the information, and it comes right back and fills it out on the computer automatically back here. And it'll tell you where they went and how long it took. So it's a great system. But that's coming out of the rescue plan. That project cost was, I think it was 19,000. So that we may be rounding the final corner on the rescue plan.
This is kind of off the wall, but it drives me nuts. You've got a line item for K9. And I just noticed it had more money in it this time. Where's all this money coming from if we're not even going to use it?
That's a great question. So we can leave that 0. K9, which one are you looking at? Expenses or revenues? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm thinking out of my head because I was looking at what I had at the house.
Oh, okay. Because I actually show.
It might not be actually any expense in that line item this year, but
I was gonna say, I think I've got it down to 0, but there's a significant sum of money in that K9 fund.
I know there's about $32,000.
Yeah.
so if you recall, Nancy, there was a point where we were told that we were not going to get a K9.
Right.
And so we took that position out of the staffing ordinance. And
But the money's still there.
yep, and there was talk we were just gonna delay it a little bit and we were just gonna utilize the counties because it's so easily accessible, but from what I understand, it hasn't been as easily accessible. It may be a topic of discussion for the police and fire, maybe to talk
There are
about.
funds to spend there if the council would like to reinstitute the K9 program.
Well, it's gonna be up to them. It's not gonna be up to us. I mean, they have to find someone who can be trained to train the dog. And no one wants to take that responsibility of taking the dog home.
Well, I don't know if it's any of our officers that would, I mean, we actually might have officers that might want to take that responsibility.
Well, so you know something I don't.
No, I'm just saying, because if you recall, the individual was telling us that we were not going to do that. It's not currently here right now, so that may be a different thought. So that's why I'm saying we may reignite the conversation, just see if there is an interest.
Well, I thought basically being a canine officer, the way we did the resolution, is a collateral duty of one of our officers.
That's right. It did change.
Just like the school resource officer. That's a collateral duty set up for him. But that canine funds, that was money that was donated, I believe, just for the canine by the citizens of Nelsonville.
But how does
So-
it keep
so it-
going up? That's what I wanna know.
They got an interest drawing account.
It is interest bearing.
Or
Part
is
of
it $2,000?
it's not that much, I don't think. So some of the K9 funds went up from opioid settlements. So that was the only acceptable use, because you had to use it for something to fight the drug problem. As a city without mental health services or social services or anything like that, treatment services, we really only had one acceptable use, which was the drug K9. The state, if you guys remember, if you folks remember, July, the state, it was actually in June, but you saw legislation for it in July. The state ordered that the opioid settlement could no longer be put into K9 funds. Apparently, we weren't the only ones to do this. And they said, no more. I couldn't give you a good reason why. I don't think I saw a good reason myself. And you guys created an opioid settlement fund where those monies will go to now.
Right.
So I think that's why it was growing, because those checks are usually $1,000 to $2,000.
Okay, well, I just thought, it's money sitting there, it's been sitting there,
That's right. That's right.
so use it or lose it.
I agree.
I know, it's not millions of dollars, but
No,
it's just,
I agree.
it's been bugging the daylights out of
Yeah,
me.
well, that
I think you
canine
guys
seemed
might-
to be effective for us, so.
I had heard about, when I first started on council, we had officers and folks say, I remember voters telling me at the door when I ran for council, that they said, why doesn't Nelsonville have a canine program? And there was a lot of momentum for it, it never happened, we traded chiefs a few times, et cetera, et cetera. When it finally happened, I was pretty involved, I was excited for it, and
It was good.
me
And it seemed
personally,
effective.
I can't speak to the finances of, I can speak to the finances of it, in this role, take off this role, and as a citizen, I would love to see it back, so.
Somebody needs to get on the wall.
That's why I'm saying send it to committee.
Yeah, send it to committee, absolutely.
That's budget draft 1.
Any other questions from the committee?
You make the print paper.
I can't. I can't.
What'd she
I
say?
should have learned. She said, can you make the print bigger?
Oh,
I can. I hear that about every year. I don't know why I don't learn my lesson.
I can still see.
So when should we meet for the second go round?
Great question. Not tomorrow. It would be nice, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It would be nice to have next week to continue to work with the department heads and to get this first draft to an acceptable visually and everything, acceptable draft. I personally, 2 weeks from today, the 22nd is great, but if,
Yeah, that'd be right before the last council meeting in October, so potentially we could have it to full council on October 28th.
yeah,
Good idea.
yeah. I also could do the 21st. Might actually be better.
no, it's,
Well, we have a little time to call it. We don't have to set it right now.
Okay, yeah.
Well, hopefully, we're gonna have mayor's court.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we can meet in another room if we need to.
Well, she's mayor.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to kick you out.
Okay, so clone Nancy from that.
The only reason I say, if we do the 22nd, if it's possible to do earlier like tonight, or maybe even just a tad earlier, I leave for my last training of the year that evening, so I'd be leaving from that meeting to.
Actually, for this, well, I can't
For
speak
Cincinnati,
for,
so.
Mr. Dunphy, that potentially could meet during the day.
Okay.
Cause I don't know, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Okay. I'll be.
At least you got a target date.
I can end with some good news.
Okay, we're ready.
Not that that was bad news, but it's not quite as easy as the last few years. There's 12 parcels the city of Nelsonville's owned forever and a day. Been paying property tax on it. The city doesn't owe property taxes, they just have to process somewhat arduous property tax exemption paperwork. You may remember, this project was in a former law director's hands 5 years ago, and 4 years ago, and 6 years ago. And there was always a delay, there was always a reason. So it was not done. We tried to get it done 2-3 years ago, before another departure in that department, 2 years ago, I think, whatever it was. And it still did not get done. We're paying the property taxes on properties we did not need to be paying. And I'm talking large sums, thousands. because some of them are big. So I got the final approval today. I cannot sign those papers, but some time ago, I don't know, 5 months ago, I said, I will do, and I have the stacks, I can bring them to you, they're as thick as these. I will do all the work if somebody here would sign these, can I say, damn papers, and we'll mail them to the state. I got the final approval today. They approved all of them for property tax exemption. The last one was approved today. And we will be getting a refund on many of those parcels back to 2020 and 2021.
Oh, wow.
So not bad.
I nominate Greg,
For what?
sign him.
Signed, well, they're signed now. They were signed and submitted. I just couldn't sign them,
Oh,
as the fiscal officer. But we hated writing that check every year. It was so dumb. I know Corey especially was here. I know Nancy's been in meetings for, I know Greg has been, where we just said, could you just please finish the paperwork? And it is a little arduous. But they're done. They're done.
Great.
Thanks to the recorder's office in the county. They were very helpful. And, the auditor's office too, the county auditor. So,
Okay, that is good news.
yep. We'll be waiting for that check.
So with that, anything else? Okay, we will adjourn at 8:17 PM.